About August 1921, I was on leave and went to North Wales with Mr. Green for my holidays. It was then that I first met Mrs. Hunter one evening on the pier at Llandudno.
Baghir y díag siad burt an tacht le chéile céna. Der an locht léan gur clítach an galar an grá. Chua an grá go crí an tú burt. Ach lach an pillair áit an grá do rinne acu. Nuair a squeal Horí Mors a ráheal Hilda Hunter, híl na pólíní gur éad ba chúis leis, agus gnearna sé é le tréan díaltais. Ag gur hrial fuair léargas ar an scéal omláin. Scéal ar a baint mhór aige le titim impireacht na Breataine as I chéile, agus ar a baint aige le cogan na Saoirse in Éireann. Tailach sevid mór le rá a bhí I dailach Hilda Bevan. Nuair a bhí sí hain agus I drefar de rís a fásuas a Lancashire, chola siad go leor scéalta faoin méid taistil a rinne muintir go chéad a haird in na himpireachta. Seilg anmhíthe fianna san Afric ina measc. Agus iad a gairí níos sinne, be bheag spéise a bhí acu ina gantar tonsclaíoch hain I dúscar tasanna.
Being married was very important. That was the career that was chosen for women in that era. The younger sister, Doris, got married and promptly became pregnant. Hilda lived close by, and I think she maybe thought she was going to be left on the shelf.
I think they were fairly similar. A phrase that my mother and her brother Gerald often repeated about them was that they were like two peas in a pod. Hilda was taller, she had a more oval face, she was quite striking looking, whereas Doris was shorter and I think a bit cheeky looking from photographs.
I think they decided they were going to have a little bit of fun after the first baby was born. So the two sisters went off on a cruise, and she saw Frank Hunter. He was cruising as well with some of his family. And I think she thought, Ireland, maybe it's more exciting. Perhaps it's a little bit different. I can get away from the mater and the stodginess of the life that she was being expected to live. And he's a good-looking fellow, and maybe life sounded more exciting.
Cantálaí a bhí Frank Hunter ag geangan na bailte ba rathúla a gcuige ulla. Bhí tionscail déanna léinte a gúil rathain, chomá le tionscail textíle a bhí ag gala méid, droglainn a bhí déanna isce beatha an chéad sca, agus teilg chearta mór a bhí déanna innealra fedime. Tháinig méadú mór ar an méid tithe a tóig go háartar a máile, agus ba é Frank Hunter a dhíal an chuid is mó acu. Bhainach gnáthíal chúil ranne stanga as Hilda an lá bear a riamh, ach ní éiteach sí galán ag am níos measa. Bhí an baile clíte marall ar a méid fearr a cáiliú sa gaga. Bhí mic agus aithreacha, dearacha agus fir céile imithe, agus bhí an tualach fácaí ag na mrá, seftú dá dailí.
Years later, I was back from America visiting my mum, and this little lady came out of a house, and she came over to me, she says, and I got to do my Coleraine accent, says, "Are you Frank Hunter's granddaughter?" And I said, "Yes." Frank Hunter was long gone by then. I said, she says, "I knew your granny." Oh, she was a lovely looking, big, tall lady. But you know what? She was the first lady in Coleraine to wear lipstick and rouge. So she stood out. And she had a flair. She's very flamboyant. I have hats of her with huge ostrich feathers, very small waist, prided herself on that, and was a party girl. So she will have been noticed, and he was well known. I think he probably was forgiven for making the terrible mistake of marrying an English woman, and that would be the feeling there at the time.
Hilda and Doris, I believe, would have had their own money. Their father, James Bevan, was a hat manufacturer, and he gave all the children, so his Hilda and Doris plus his 6 children from his previous marriage, gave them all shares in the company for Christmas and birthdays, so they wouldn't necessarily have been dependent on the husbands.
They had 3 children each, and they did that within less than 6 years. And you know, the prospect of having a baby every year or every 18 months for the rest of their married lives, I think that might have had something to do with the feeling of, I need to get away. Well, they didn't have a role model as a mother. I mean, your mother's a principal of a school and she runs the household like the school. So they didn't really know that perhaps you ought to stay around and look after your children.
Im líonta lua na fichiú íse, dúrú nach neacha an rian faoi riamh impireacht na Breataine. Agus an tíbheile an dain á chúl rathain, bhí an eisteacht ar fád a bhain leis an síl rachmasach cólínach sin in ná go George Morse, nó Hóirí mar a bear Anna Rugú an dar lá go bhí Márta 1897 I Wanganui na Nua-Héalainne, agus bhí tred sa bhuileige. Dúrú gur as tíiseach Maori a baistú Hóirí, fear a phreid a hanahead I gogad talú na Nua-Héalainne, cé gur ás cordis atrú I ní an choga. Tóigú Hóirí I deach meán acmach, agus fuair sé a chud éidechais I scoil Wachalaí a bhí bunaí ar scolaní Poiblí Hasanna. Curú béimán ar phréinál bhíleata, agus faoi ís 5 bliana déag, bhí Adam warafacha mar ná chud de híal Hóirí.
Don chumar gur bheith an 6 duine Hóirí gur síméige síl achtrú le bheith aige. Feicimid é sin ón na cuntaisí a thugtar ar an táma chaise ar scoil, gombeadh sé mar an chéad buchailiste sa rac má bhí rac a tosú. As feicimid freisin é mar gur sé anchiachrach dul agus trid sa chugad damhanda, cé gur sé róg le listáil san harm.
In 1914, at the age of 17, I enlisted in the New Zealand Expeditionary Force. I went straight from school into camp. Shortly after enlisting, I went into the Flying Corps and became a flight pilot, ranking as lieutenant.
Rinne Hóirí gach iirecht a chur an úl gur líoch coga a bhíán, ag rá gur listáil sé san aram ag tús an chéad chogad damhanda in 1940. Ach darla na chód, dáin sé san Nua-Héalainn go dtí gur tugadh cunscríomh isteach 2 bhliain dar gcéann. Agus nuair a ranaíodh a ainm I malláid ar deire, díodh sé 100 punt le cíntu nach meach sé ina haidir coise. Sim mhór airgid a bhí anna gnám, ach cheanna sé áitthó I scoil Seán Ródaach Etlaireachta I Christchurch. Ní raibh mianach an philóta a Hóirí. Heasta go leor ardamhaid ón deagascóir Cecil Hill, agus bhí sé tasaí taidach. Scríb Maclean eile, A.E.W. MacDonald in the Yearling. Morse fired a chair at my head and got a bull. Also an electric globe. I hope he does not go off his rocker. Nuair a ecanmuid na seans gonán in na Hetláin luas sin, is ábhar ionta sé go dánach aon duine slán.
While flying in New Zealand, I crashed and was seriously injured. It was about 10 months before I was able to resume military duties.
Dúrú le Morse nach meach cad ag file ar an scoil Etlaireachta I 1980 go héin ón na himpiiste. Dáta sé orú seans a bháin eile thuirtó, ag rá gur a chuid gon tréáil dinta aige, agus go gáileach sé 100 punt mar amánach sé an cháilíocht amach. Daire leis a cheadannas eitilte a áil, lá bháin sal rá ar a thuirt ar frinseí an chéad chogad damhanda.
I served in the New Zealand Expeditionary Forces with the Royal Flying Corps until the armistice. I then went to the London University for 2 years, studying engineering. But the prospects were not bright, and I crossed over to Ireland and joined the police. I was a cadet in the Auxiliary Division of the Royal Irish Constabulary and was stationed at Tralee, 20 miles from Killarney, in the south of Ireland.
You've got to remember at this time that the British government is facing a number of different imperial concerns. Ireland is just one part of a large imperial jigsaw, and it does not want to have its energies and its manpower expended on Ireland. So there is a tendency to insist that the Royal Irish Constabulary, that has been policing Ireland since the 1830s, that it's the job for the Royal Irish Constabulary to try and defeat whatever agitation is going on in Ireland. It becomes more and more difficult, of course, to maintain that position into 1920. And even by the end of 1919, we know from the noises coming from Dublin Castle that the British government was being made aware that the policemen were not capable of doing this job on their own. And of course, the policemen in Ireland, the Royal Irish Constabulary, many of them who were Irish Catholic, even nationalists, quite well integrated within the Irish community, they were becoming increasingly targeted. They had been identified by the IRA as traitors to their country.
Vrachas I London gur raibh coinbhleacht hivíalta a bhí a gceist in éireann, ná raibh coinbhleacht bhíleata a bhí a gceist, agus go bhfuil go fóil brath an RIC agus beidir RIC neartaithe chun smachtaáil rudaí in éireann. Ach de réir mar chuí 1990 a rá, go háirithe fómhar 1990. Bhí sé soiléir nach raibh an RIC ábalta an job sin a dhéanamh, agus dús thosaítear ag arcú dhaoine ó híomh muide éireann le golisteach san RIC, bin dram a tugu na Black and Tans níos déanaí a bhí go hifigiúil tíbhaistid an RIC ach a bhí de facto ag feimú mar orsa fearmíleatach nua in éireann.
Thosa an fórsa paramíleatach nua seo i teachtán bhreatain i mí Márta 1920. Tháinig casa brúdúil sa goga inis. Ní rabáda go dánig mí chlú ar na saidirí nu as an slád a rinne siad agus an léir scris a dág siad ina ní. Cha siad éid in na bólíní, ach bhí go leor áram ar iompar acu, agus bhí ardú agus cead fáite acu an tairi amach a chlí cebé bailach ar bheas siad hain.
Bhí gantanas de eistes umláin RIC an chachachan RIC na festus bottle green seo, agus ní rá dóhann trouser ar fáil, so curú trouser ó arm na bratainna a bhí caci ar fáil dus na fér seo, gus sinna fá arán chuma bhreac sin orthú. Agus tuéis na heachtraí a limnach na rachuí na daoine seo timpeall na sráidena sa chathair ag brise foiineoga agus ag ionsaí gná dhaoine ar an tráid. Bhran na daoine áitiúla an tanam Black and Tans orthú i gcuimhne ar a facha fiocha a bhí an sa cheantar.
Is saoire na bliana 1920 bhí sé seléir go raibh na hóglaí i cruinniú neart. Agus bhuna rialtas na Breataine fórsa paramíleatach eile le néad a chlí. Bunaíodh na dúchrónaí le takeú leis an RIC, ach bunaíodh an tainad nua seo, na pólíní cúnta nó auxiliaries, leis an IRA is scrisa. Saidirí dí ostí gan chuid is mú a bhís na dúchrónaí, ach ír effigí cosú le Hóirí Mórs a bhís na pólíní cúnta, scá éanad a tugadh le chéile mar orsa ionsaithe.
Den chuid is mó is iarmhhuiil de orsaí bhíleata na Breataine arciú isteach san auxiliaries. Agus de bhhair se bhí taithí bhíleata acu bhí siad ábalta. Arm úsáid bhí taithí acu ar ordaithe a chhlacha agus a chur bhaim agus mar sinse, ach ní taithí ar bith acu ar aimú mar fólíní i ggóthaics hibhíalta. Bíonn cultúrán difriúil ag fórsaí bhíleata gcompráid le fórsaí pólínachta. Bíonn pólíní ag bra go buint éirúd arás morálach agus ar chomhaidbrú leis an déanaar áitiúil, choirúir an sin ar fórsa nuair a héan rudaí as smacht. Bíonn fórsaí bhíleata ag gunbhlacht tradiisiúnta ag chuir a tolle i bhaim le harm ar ghram eile, agus ní bhíonn siad ag bra ar chomhaidbrú ag go dtíon pointe céine. An deachtacht a bhí an in éireann in 1990 agus in 1920 ná go raibh an túdrás morálta agus an túdrás hibhíalta caiilte ag rialtas na Breataine.
Níor chuir an gná RIC éon áilte roimh na dúchrónaí agus na pólíní cúnta. Bhí teoracha tucaí gan RIC áitiúil poblachtánaí a scuile mar a stoppach siad agus an tardú tucaáid. Ach bhí drogal ar go leorach go bheith sin íana. ní ra an imrí chéana ar na pólíní cúnta. Mar sin cudú Hóirí Morse agus arcaí eile ó champlacht H go trálí faoi cheannas John Alistair McKinnon. Fear ar a cáilear as a bheitcha brúdúil agus a déiteach sé bheith.
Fear nach raibh maul chun achtainna anna óréigeanach ar fad a ordú agus a dhéanamh é héin. The bharigh sé burt ihe nolog nédig fethe north. The bhris sé isteach de dhéanaidir rúthair ar teach ihe nolog nédig fethe agus de hín ma chean úncail John Lean chun gunna aáil agus the squeal McKinnon rocker an agus a bharigh sé agus fuair sé bás láthar bán díreach an san. Thóg sé nómata agus lig sé fardar banam Morris Reedy, Hadger a rá agus squeal sé rocker ina cheam. Agus an san de góig siad an teach.
Mar ar a sim mhóraige in achtraíocht agus nar ampa a ghriam le treidiríomh, ní éita Hóirí tacht go héireann ag am níos fearr, I ri ceangan na seachtaí ab achrannaí is stair na tíre. Bunaíodh Complacht H gan arm cúnta díreach 3 lá sula bhfuair Terence McSweeney, ardmhéar a Chorca, bás ar stalc ocrais.
Ceapam gur chuig scéal tréalach mac sibhna ardmhéar a Corcaí I bhaim go mór ar gachéon gnéad an saoil ina éireann. Bhí sais clúdach idirnáisiúnta agus tuairiscóirí idirnáisiúnta ag scríomh marialar an scéal san sa Rank in Mexico, sna Stát Aontaithe, bhí cínlínta nuachta aige sa New York Times, agus scéal almhór a bheith é. Leistigh de seachtain de croch siad Kevin Barry im lá clia. Ní raibh sé ach 8 milliún díos agus péad a raibh ar bon ag Kevin Barry go raibh an freagra sais rógéir ar fad. Agus bhí an dain ar fad ag fara ar péní a bheith ag tiitim amach in éireann ag an am.
Listáil Hóirí san arm cúnta an lá in ní a hochrid Terence McSweeney. Tá sé luite mar efigach arm I bhir 7 a 4. Tháinig casa ina chinúint an lá a chós éisteach a Complacht H is scoil heicniúil hobar bhí dóir trálí. An chéad lá go bhí na saona níos ag fiche a bhí an. An lá céanna a crochú Kevin Barry im lá clia. Bhí cogan na saoirse ag gairí níos brúdúla. De réir mar bhí an forréigen ag dul an olcais ar fud na tíre, bhí an síl a gúil rathain ag galará mar bhagnách. Sin chial a bhí leis sin go Hilda Hunter ná a bheith pósta lena Céile Frank agus a bheith na máthir ag trúr páiste. Mar a ggéanna lena ddrifor de rís is asna a bhí in na bán chéile óg agus na máthir chomá.
Most women married young in those days, but they married young. There was a massive war. They were having children throughout that war. Birth control was obviously in its infancy, and I guess they weren't encouraged to use it. And they were so tired of just churning out these children and then keeping their husbands in hot dinners and collars, you know, that they wanted to do something for themselves.
Ba vinnig a dag Hilda agus Doris a goods fear céile agus a báistí ina ní le galar siide le chéile. In airach na bliana ní deag fiche héan, hí na ddriforcha ar siide ag chlándid nó sa bhreatan bheg. Agus iad a siúl cos trá I cheháin, casú fear go chud an arm cúnta orthu, a bhí a glachas sus ó Fred an IRA.
It was then that I first met Mrs. Hunter one evening on the pier at Llandudno. Her sister Mrs. Holden was on the pier with her. I met Mrs. Hunter the same evening and we chatted on the pier. We arranged to go bathing in the evening. We went and she invited me to the house where she and Mr. and Mrs. Holden were staying. I practically spent the next 3 weeks in Mrs. Hunter's company.
They spent a lot of time together over the next couple of weeks. They went sea bathing together. When he left to go back to his barracks in Tralee, she went on part way with him on the train. They were writing letters to each other and even meeting up. And apparently for quite long periods. They went and met up in places like, I think it was Black Rock, was one of the places, and they signed into a hotel there as man and wife, as Mr. and Mrs. Morse. So I assume that's where the sexual relationship started. They were in each other's company for up to 10 days. Now, what on earth was Hilda telling her husband during this time?
Sarah put that in her thing that he'd actually stayed at the house. Maybe he did. Maybe Frank thought, I'll let him come and see us as a couple and see if that'll do the trick. Maybe he talked to him about it, but it wasn't enough.
Dán Hóirí agus na pólíní cúnta in éireann I bhád ní an tusa cogaí a chur deireadh le cogadh na saoirse. Bhí sé héin agus Hilda ag scríomh agus ag bóla le chéile, go dtí gur dtí hlógú complecht teit I mí aimnear na bliana 1922. Chó go leorgad na pólíní cúnta as sin go dtí an Philistine, bhí steward H.H. Tudor. Ach ní acha Hóirí leo, bhí a róthan gon síl sin feici aige, agus bhí sé gcéireann níos mó a eicáil go Hilda Hunter. An carú lá go bhí na bealtaine 1922, chroch Hilda Hunter agus I ddrifor de rís seolta an HMS Barrabool, a fágáil London agus a tuairt ai Sydney na Australia, agus a stoppa seall Cape Town a Malach. Bhí Hóirí Morse listan na Baisnarí freisin, chomá le Eric Preedy, efigach arm as túscart na Breataine bige a bhí a gcuideachta do rís. Dag an bhirt ddrifor fearr agus trúr páiste ina dia le gealtanas be mar se darás faoi an coppla blian.
I wonder how they talked their husbands into letting them go on that trip. But James Bevan, the explorer, their father, died in 1917, and he left them all shares in this hat factory. I think they probably inherited a little bit of money of their own, because the average man would not say, bye dear, have a lovely time. And my feeling is that my grandfather probably sensed that she wasn't happy, having all these children boom, boom, boom like that, and Ireland was definitely not what she had hoped for socially and weather-wise and everything else, that he probably said, you can go, in an effort to keep her, if that makes sense.
I'm getting goosebumps now, a complete, tingling and disbelief in what was coming out, because they set off on this ship from England. Each of them had a lover on board. Hilda had Hóirí. He was already in the picture by then. Doris was with a man called Eric Preedy, and but on the ship she ditched him and started up with somebody called Everett.
People who were on the ship described her behavior and her sister's behavior, and they flirted with people, but they both had their boyfriends on the boat with them. So, it was all a well-planned maneuver. But I still wonder how, in the name of God, they found the freedom to do it and weren't stopped.
Hilda and Doris and Hóirí and Preedy sailed down to Cape Town. They took some time in Cape Town, but it seems that Hilda and Hóirí went on from Cape Town to Australia, but Doris didn't. She stayed behind with this Everett that she'd taken up with on the boat.
Chud Hóirí agus Hilda fuhu is Sydney, agus má banú stanga as Hilda a gú rahain, tá sé dacad a hawlú céir de híl sí faoi Chicago an Deisgirt. Áit gharabh a bhí Sydney, agus bhí cúnaíarú I gceangan na háitaní ba gharabh a leog, Darlinghurst. Riocht rungan na rásúr an leasanam a bhí a gantar. Níor báda gur bhog sé de ríist, agus thosa Hóirí ag loma cuireach in iarghúil na Australia. Mar Mr. and Mrs. Morse a chuir siad I dthain in Anna.
Hóirí's looking for work. He gets work as a sheep shearer, and they go out to Burke, which, it's whoop-whoop now, and my God, it would have been, a very difficult journey out there, and there would have been absolutely nothing out there in those days.
Hastil Hóirí agus Hilda timpeall na hiorgúlach, a marachtal a bobbal, agus a gáil áit be a ra cuiide le lama. sul ar ilse ar Sydney rih nolig na bliana 1922. Chuir Hilda agus Hóirí fuhu is Sydney a ríist, áit ar aibre sesin mar hiúnair agus siise is siopa éadaí. An sin, le toban, dag Hilda. Leis an defrid a bhí ar a imimecht sal a bhí a Hóirí amach, chuir Hilda a runna agus a feas isteach ina mála trí himpiist. Bhfuil sesin ag na pólíní le rátas a dhéana, ach bhí an chuma gur an níos mú bortha faoin na runna a bheith ar éire ná a bhean. She's a silly little woman, a dúirte. She knows I'm a crack shot, and the sight of my revolver always scares her. I was the champion revolver shot of Ireland. Many's the time my revolver saved my life in tight corners when we were held up by the Sinn Féiners.
Hilda did a bunk from Hóirí on the 23rd of December, just before Christmas. And the police found her, but they wouldn't give Hóirí her address. But he went off to Manly and found her in Manly, just coincidentally on the beach. Apparently they were then quite friendly thereafter, and they would meet each other and so on, but Hilda wanted to stay in Manly because she was looking after someone else's child as a means of employment.
Híl Hóirí gra Hilda fáte ar aige, ach ní ras aige gra Doris is Sydney chomá, agus gur ticéad ceannaí ag a murtste for an SS medic, a bhí le curchan farige an lád ar géan.
I got a letter and a telegram from Mrs. Hunter on the Saturday saying she had left for Tasmania. She said she would write from Tasmania when she was settled and let me know her plans. I ascertained from Dalgetty's that Mrs. Hunter and Mrs. Holden were on the Medic, booked for South Africa.
Her sending that letter unfortunately sealed her fate.
Dúirt an cólacht lingis le mórs gur an SS medic le bóla isteach ag Adelaide, agus gur ben 10 seans a bheith ag brethir an long ná thuras 3 lá a dhéine ar an train.
Bhí cléanna ag Hóirí mórs cinnte gur runán leis an tamar fad, agus is doch gur léirú é sin dúin gur gael sort faoi leithéige leis an gcunán, thug sé lesanam ar a chunán, thug sé mo chara ar an gcunán.
Thug Hóirí léim ar chrain agus rinne an turas 870,000 go Adelaide le bheith an rih Hilda. Bhí sé na hir a géibh, a chara le na híomh, nuair a tháinig an SS medic chun duga le Hilda agus Doris ar bord.
Then he sees her and Doris playing cards apparently on the deck with some of the officers and other passengers. And he recognises what she's wearing because Hilda was dressed to the nines, despite it being the 24th of February and stinking hot. Anyway, he goes up to her and says, hello, Hilda, or something. And she apparently said, oh, Digger, you shouldn't have come.
Mrs. Hunter and I went ashore and walked along the shore in a northerly direction. There were a goodly number of people about the wharf. She would not tell me why she went away without telling me. I told her that I thought it was due to her sister's influence.
Hiúil Hóirí agus Hilda ar an gala in Adelaide, go dtí go dtáinig siad chofáda le sheds a bhí trécíd ar dalromh, taobh leis an móthar éireann.
They have some sort of discussion or altercation or something, and he pulls the gun out, and he says it goes off accidentally.
I knelt down on my right knee and begged her to stay. She said, don't make a scene. I looked and saw a man passing along the rails walking north. I put my hands in my pockets as I got up. She said, what have you got there? Show it to me. I said, my friend, which was how I used to refer to my revolver.
He was a lovesick puppy, I think. He couldn't believe that the great love of his life, despite the fact she was 10 years older than him, was leaving him. And I think he probably was in a pretty, high state of anxiety.
Tar éis dó Hilda is scuile, dumpar Hóirí thar a móthar éireannaí agus leag sé síos ar thar an clocha í.
I never intended to fire the revolver or to shoot or injure Mrs. Hunter. I would far rather have shot myself. It was purely an accident. I am innocent of any offence against Mrs. Hunter.
De réir cosúlachta fuair an bhórt an bua agus dumpa sé an gunna hain. Hit sé an na chrap le taobh Hilde. Bhí Paulíní Adelaide an sin faoi an coppla númad, agus tugadh thóirí chuig an ospidéal. Cholua agus bhí biseach chuireadh faoi glas I brísú na carrachaid. Faoi dheire, tháinig sé os cór na cuairte uachtarí. Bhí sé anois ar phríal, agus cúisithe as dúnmharú. Fear a cha 8,000 an éireann le na chara gan freigrach de réir cosúlachta do aon duine. Ba aon 10 duine riamh gan bheith sin mairíthe uafasach sin a rinne slád an éireann coppla bliain roimhe sin a thua ar phríal mar gheall ar dhúnmharú. An bhórt an tríú lága bheitheh 1924 chuú thoirí mórs ar phríal I gcuairt uachtarach na Hostrála Heas in Adelaide, as Hilda Hunter a dhúnmharú.
I was born in Wanganui, New Zealand, and am 27 years of age. I'm a single man and 6 feet, 2.5 inches in height. In 1914...
Dúirt a thoirí mórs freagra a thuairt ar cheistena sa gcuairt. Níor chola an gceora aon rud mhaith ach rátas a rinne cur síos ar a bhaile san nua-héalainn ar a chuid ama in éireann, agus ar an lá cinúnach sin ar chala Adelaide.
I was a cadet in the Auxiliary Division of the Royal Irish Constabulary and was stationed at Tralee, 20 miles from Killarney in the south of Ireland.
Tá cúlra an chúisí anthóhachtach sa chásáirithe seo, tugann sé deis dó féin a chur an aithne den dúr mar léach ach go háirithe, agus an taobh mealtach do farsantacht a chur an aithne dóibh agus beidir taobh eile den scéal a haspáint nó mar tá chliste acu ón in chúiseamh.
She told me that she had no use for her husband and that he ill-used her.
Ní amháin gur léach coga a bhí a thóirí, ach bhí sé sa gcuairt gur an bhean ar a grá aige de ach cosint aige. Ní dún warfór Hilde a bhí an, ach an fearr a hábháil ó fósa droch ídeachí.
He wasn't like that. The only time I ever heard him get cross was when he talked about the Orange Order. He said it was bad news that he did not approve and he would not join the Orange Order, which meant he suffered business-wise because the Protestant North, but that's Irish politics. He wasn't having any of that.
Thug thóirí cúntas ar achtraí an tráthnúna sin. Dúirt sé gur a siúlbeag deas acu, agus gur a cárdas má idir agus Hilde, agus gur timpiste bhiltinach a bhí sa méid a tharla.
I knelt down on my right knee and begged her to stay. She said, "Don't make a scene." I looked and saw a man passing along the rails walking north and put my hands in my pockets as I got up. She said, "What have you there? Show it to me." I said, "My friend," which is how I used to refer to my revolver.
Céinteas cara gunna do chuine atá cúisithe do dhúnmharú, bhí sé sin an dain séireach, scéal an dain séireach agus íbhá an dain séireach le crothú ar lumsa.
As I was facing Mrs. Hunter, I was in the act of taking my revolver from my right-hand pocket to show her. When I take my revolver from my pocket, it is my practice to draw the hammer back with my thumb to prevent it catching in my pocket. I suppose I did so on this occasion. Just as I seemed to have the revolver from my pocket, it went off.
Níl an scéil sin incréite ar chorbe, bhí taithí ag an bhar seo ar gunaí. An rud a ceart do a dhéanamh, seachas scéal eile a crothú, ach leagan an inchúiseamh a lágú an is nach gradach an dúraí an leagan sin a hiile. Ní gá scéal eile a crothú ar chorbe.
Thug fineise go bhacha sé mórs a tógáil coppla céim siar ó Hilde, marí nach saidúr I món drilála, agus gur arda mórs a lábha go corframánach sular scuil sé í. Chortha sé anáib go thóirí sa gcuairt gur a iompar saidúra aige ag an númaid sin, agus gur bééis sin an chuí scuil sé í. Bhí sé hééis leabhart go hoscail de freisin faoi nach chud achtraí fiáine in éireann, agus rinne a abhcóide éireacht beagaíonna do chóras an áram. In dhearan na dála, ní deag fi cehad a bhí an. Dír a cúpla bliain héis go Hóirí Mórs páirteach lacha I gceann go na hainchaníomhara ba bhí chlútaí I gcogan na Saoirse. Achtra a bhí go mór sa nuacht timpeall an Domhan.
Kerry becomes particularly difficult in the second half of 1920. It had not necessarily been the most active county up to that point during the War of Independence, but things become particularly difficult as a result of the effective operations of the IRA in that region. The IRA in Kerry was determined to take out individual RIC members and to target the auxiliaries and the Black and Tans.
Scuilú agus gurtaíú Bert Fólín an ihe Suladonic Hóirí Mórs go trálí, agus rá éanad gon IRA Bert eile. Patrick Waters, fearr a chuid an RIC as Gaile, agus Ernest Bright, dú chrónach as London. Bhí Dan Keating ar rinne gon éanad IRA sin.
It was a big night. Everyone, all the different companies were summoned. They occupied Tralee. At the time, the Black and Tans, they used to go to Tralee at night and make a lot of noise and hound people when they met them. And it was a sight to meet them one night. And actually, on that particular night, that we were expecting big things to happen, there was only 2 of them captured, actually, by the Strand Road Company. They weren't seen again.
Dógur an RIC go mbeadh sé na thugad dearg sa gceantar, mar ambeadh an bhirtear scuilte sir ribh a deach lag ar maidin, an lád ar ghiam. Ach bhí an bhirtear an RIC mar of hana hain, agus ba isteach sa gogad dearg sin a hiúil Hóirí Mórs.
On the 1st of November, that's the first day of the reprisal, they go out and they smash windows, they fire into the air, they beat up people. 3 civilians are killed over the course of the week. The town hall is burnt that night. People describe these sort of hellish scenes that an IRA man says that the Tans appear to have gone mad. It's almost this sort of macabre, carnivalesque atmosphere of fire and danger and shooting and terror and people screaming and such.
Go dtí sin a gcogan na Saoirse, ionsaithe scipaí a rinne na dúchrónaí deach ná. Ach scéal eile ar fad a bhí a léagar rálaí. Ionsaí brúdúil fada ar gnághine a bhí an. Pinos a dhearr na dúchrónaí agus na póilíní cúnta ar an bobal sibhialtach.
The second night is when it really gets terrible. The Black and Tans, they burn a number of houses that night of people with associations with Sinn Féin, but this is something that affects everyone because the fire spreads to other houses. People who don't have a connection with Sinn Féin, they find that their homes are being burnt as well. But that night is particularly terrible because you have descriptions of people jumping from their upstairs windows out onto the street because their house is on fire. People in their night clothes. It's just this really chaotic, hellish atmosphere. But I suppose the second night is probably the worst in the terms of physical damage that the Black and Tans do. But what happens is, after that, they insist that all business is closed down in Tralee. And this creates this terrible atmosphere and people start fleeing the town. People start boarding their homes. International journalists say it's as bad as anything they had seen on the Western Front in terms of French towns that had been occupied by the Germans. By the end of the week, by Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, it's becoming clear that people are actually going hungry because bakeries are closed. Goods aren't being sold. People are going hungry.
Bhí tuairiscóirí ón rank agus ó ga cúine den down í Gorcaig agus sa cúladar go raibh scéal mór titim amach í Rálaí agus the leanadar áirithe gáthrálaí agus leistigh de cúpla lá tá scéalta margheall ar the sack of Tralee ó thuairisc the Bay of Plenty Times sa Nua-Héileán.
Bad news is coming out of Ireland. The bad news cannot be contained in Ireland. The maintenance by senior British figures that they are containing this particular problem is not credible as a result of an event like the siege of Tralee, which is being written about internationally as an attempt to try and starve out a town of some 10,000 people, impacting, of course, on men, women and children. And newspapers like The Observer in Britain were referring specifically to the immense weakening of Britain's moral position throughout the world.
Margheall ar an gáine idirnáisiúnta a fuair an bhreatain de bhár léagar Rálaí, Thug siad faoi achtas boltsgeriachta. Feachtas a rinne níos mú dochad ná maithaschob. Cuireadh Grian Chraifar fáil gan na meán de haidirí féin smachtaí na Breataine I mun eibríocht bhíleata I gundé chéirí. Ach níor a bhfad go bhórthas amach gur pictirí bréige a bhíon tú. Cá dan na Camry amháin a bhí an. Le fear a ligantar thu gur buil gan IRA a bhíon tú, fráideannaí clúthara chill inín lénín. Bhí an foréigen an rianta a rinne na dúchrónaí agus na pólíní cúnta, complot héit Choirí Morris in a measc, frálí tobisteach gan bhreatan ó híomh caidirh peiblia. Tíbhaiste go hachtan, tháinig airdathe ó Hamar Greenwood, an príomhrúnaí go éide, go mrisí léagar frálí. Ba é Major John Alistair McKinnon a bhí gceannas an arm cúnta I ri seachtain scebh thóireachta frálí. Fear a clúad as a bheith éifichtach a chur tail impreacht na Breataine I bhaim. Ba omís lá de hála faoin na chóram, agus bhí a bhás mar phríomh spruch ag IRA chéirí. Chá deinear óglach chead a bhí a lorug a greiche, ach sa deire, daide le piléir marafach a chur McKinnon agus é gimmert golf a drálí.
Is léir go raibh sais archetype an de dar a raibh mór bail den na auxiliaries agus tá sais an cuioine san ortha go ráidir bar brúdúlach foréigeanach agus is léir go raibh mórs foréigeanach amach an san a mór dúsáid sé an gunna a fuair sé mór auxiliary I drolí de bhir sé leis sé agus é ag dul ar chuid taistelí agus dúsáid sé an gunna canan céine chun Hilda Hunter a bharú.
Dad wathirí gur minic a hábháil a dhona é nuair a bhí sé sáin ag na Sinn Féiners shráideannaí frálí. Ach anois bhí an fear seo ar a lámh ionintach aige ar an gunna ag gghearradh a churanúil gon Eora gur timpiste a bhí an. Seachas dúnmharú gan trua gan taise a hála marall ar racht éada.
Tá tuiscintá gin inneo ar asláinte ar dogamid neamhord stros ar thrámach nó PTSD. Agus is asláinte is seo a bhfuil I mean comharthaí sort éagsúla aige a brathair an duine. Tuigemuid freisin ní amháin go dagan sé ó trauma a olingíon duine, agus féidir tacht ón ó trauma ecin duine nó an trauma a churn siad san na gréoch ar chuine eile. Tá mi ceapla sé bailach mar stratéis ag drám cosanta tháirí ómarcha béim a chur ar an seans gur a neamhord stros ar thrámach aige, mar tá seansa an gombeach artha cúnta sa thuairt nó gombeach ar cúnta sa thuairt sa chuairt ar an sais brúdúlacht nó foréigean ar sesin baintach leis nuair a bhí sé I drálí nó nuair bhí sé lonathan éireann. Agus dá bhrí sin seans gombeach sé deacair ar Eora báid a bheith acu le siúd dá gluisidís gur sesin pórtach I lehéid de bhrúdúlacht.
I thought she was dead. I bent over and kissed her. I would rather the bullet had struck me than her. I had killed the one who was to me the dearest woman in the world. The one woman who had made life worthwhile for me. The one I had come here to protect. I felt I could not live and determined to take my life. I again drew my revolver from my right-hand pocket and fired to shoot myself, but missed. I fired again, holding the gun against my body.
Is tócha gur béon aimime bhí ag mór sa an am sin ná bá an dúréh bhaintach dó hain, ach dó rian ar chuir sé an irid sin béim ar an táhacht a bhí ag buint le na scéil hain choigh sé íomhá den narcissist ceart agus ní dócha gur hainte sin leis an dúré.
Hep go thomláin ar thóirí trua a spreaga a grúthe an Eora. Níor thóg sé ach cearach an númaidarú áil ciontach as dúnmharú. Líag mrá cair scart I deach na cuairte, léad faoi rudaí a bhí le teacht, ach níor thug an breitheamh ádarú. Riar sé thóirí chun báis.
Buineann an tríal seo go mór leis an ré áirithe a bhí ann na 1950, agus bhí anna bhéimeann san tríal ar an moráltacht a bhí buint leis an bán fósta seo le postí agus í imithe leis an fearr an léch cogaí seo go tír eile. Agus is tóchas an léhananta atá níos ann go mbeadh níos mó tuiscinne ag dúré agus go mbeadh níos mó béimens an chás ar an sicóíocht ar an Iarna go mín freigra éagsúil ag saidúir atá imíthe faoi stras an chogaí agus beidir nach bhfuil sé mar an ggéine leis an gná duine nuair a hagann sé faoi stras agus faoi bhrú.
Tharann scéal mórs áard an phobal, agus bhí bá acu leis. Thosa maithe agus mór ús le na carach a bailú sínithe. Scríomh máireach í saidirí ag na nóchtáin, ag impír na húdarás mór sa hábháil.
He seems to have been quite a charismatic person that everybody wanted to help, and they found him quite, just someone very an unusual person to have found himself in that situation.
Tar éis dó é héna scuile ar an duga in Adelaide, daire le Hoirí Morse agus é gurtaí go duna, an teachtaíocht Come at Once is scríomh ag an maintíar na Francis Ryder, os láithí Sassenach a bhí in Adelaide ag an am. Nuair a chola sí faoi scéal Hoirí, tháinig sí chuige san ospidéal. D'eagra tacadóirí Hoirí achannaí i dtír trócaire is a bhí sínithe ag 22 míle duine, ach rás an aon chluige bhí an inis. In Adelaide, chua bre bháis a bhaim 28 lá i ní a fógartha, agus bhí sealáin an chrochadóra á réiteach acu.
His petition for clemency was granted on the 2nd of July, and he was due to be hanged on the 5th. So that was a fairly close call.
Laidiú brehannas báis Hoirí go dtí príosúnacht síl, agus chuir sé aontaintas go deoraghine gur leabhar fine mór an unchúisih amach ar a hon, ba í sin dreifear Hilde de rís. Dimpa sí orú Hoirí a hábháil, ag rá gur béis na bhecha teastal ó Hilde. Dúirt sí freisin, Morse was born wicked and is too bad to die. Tromlaí amachchas amach a bhí inis sa rud a thosa mar achtra choiríoch. Bhí Hilde marmh, agus an buinte sin a rá, ba chosúil go raibh de rís cineál cáilte.
So Doris has been through this really awful mill. She goes back to England a year and a bit later, in January 1926. She packs her bags and heads off to Africa on her own. But what she did there in the initial phase was she set up a tobacco farm. But she goes back to England in 1960, June 1960, because she is ill. She calls it her interior nonsense. She thought that she had some form of cancer. On the 21st of June 1960, she kills herself. The autopsy finds that she didn't have cancer, she had an abscess on her liver, which could have been treated with penicillin.
Ní amháin go dtáinig Hoirí Morse slán ó Halán an chrochadóra, ach níor chá sé ach 10 bliana sa brísún, agus scuilú siire ag íse 36. An ís chéana is a bhí Hilde nuair a fuir sí bás. Fad is a bhí sé sa brísún, daire le Hoirí céim an óracha a bhaint amach i gcúrsa ailtireachta. D'il sé ar an nua-héalainn. Fós sé is bhí burt wacha aige. Cáiliú é ar an 10 lá a Aibreán 1983, agus é 86 bliain gaois. Nuair a rinneú comóra ar na chéad céimethe ó scoil etlóireachta Wigram, anam níú bóthar i ní Hoirí Morse, ír fólín cúnta agus dún warfór ciontathe Hilde Hunter.
I personally thought, God dang it, you really shouldn't have got off, because I cannot believe that it was a crime of passion, sure, but that it was an accident, which was his claim. He had the gun in his pocket. She called his friend. You do not take a loaded gun. I mean, he wasn't loading it up in his pocket, and shoot someone through the heart by accident.
The thing that really annoyed me, though, was every time it was all about him, and Hilda was the postscript. You know, it was his exam results, great big long list of this, he's done that, he's done. Oh, and by the way, he murdered Hilda Emily Hunter on the 24th of November 1924.
Thank you.